Hanukkah is a time for storytelling. By the glow of the Hanukkah candles, we tell the stories of our people, we tell the stories of our history, we tell the stories of our own families. More important than the presents by the light of the candles are the gifts of stories. Some say we are the stories we tell. We are the accumulation of the stories that we tell. So it could be a children's storybook that you take out, or it could be a story that you heard from ancestors that you're passing down now to descendants. These are priceless and powerful gifts, much more important than the physical gifts that we give. The Hanukkah story we most often tell is the rabbinic imaginative story about the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 nights. On the 7th night of Hanukkah, when Hanukkah coincides with Rosh Chodesh, there is Chag HaBanot, the festival of the daughters, a North African Jewish custom of telling the stories of the hidden heroines of Hanukkah. This year, Rosh Chodesh falls on Friday night, Saturday day, Saturday night into Sunday. So you can keep that in mind. What are the stories of the women of your family that you may wish to tell? The historic Hanukkah story that we might tell is about the Maccabees fighting off the Syrian Greeks, how the few defeated the many. But the historically true Hanukkah story that we rarely tell is the story of an internal struggle among Jews, between Jews, Jew against Jew. Over what? Over how much acculturation is the right amount of acculturation. And this is a debate that is still raging among the Jewish people. It's the one that trips us up most often in the most variety of ways. In the time of the Maccabees, the question of the day was how much Greek culture is too much. We know that our people then took on the Greek language, they took on Greek names, they took on Greek fashion, they enjoyed sport and art and music that rose out of Greek culture. And so I would say this is a great conversation to bring to your circles of family and friends by the light of the Hanukkah candles. How much acculturation today in our world, in our setting, is the right amount of acculturation, and how much is too much? When does it tip into something dangerous, even? And I believe that since October 7th, when we are feeling more and more estranged among the dominant culture, more singled out, this is an especially urgent conversation for us to have. And it always comes into clear focus, no matter the news of the day, clear focus at this time of year because of all the beautiful celebrations for Christmas in the workplace, in the schools, in the public squares of our cities. It is all so beautiful. And we know it isn't ours. We have little lights in the window. So this sense of feeling out of sync with the broader and dominant culture comes into clearer focus this time of year. I think we want it both ways. We want to be the same and we want to be different. I think that's always been true. If you think of our origin story, Abraham is described in the Torah as Avraham HaIvri. Abraham, not only the one who speaks Hebrew, Ivrit, but Ivri more literally means the one who crosses over, the one who is countercultural, the one who crosses over the river to another place, to take who he was and to leave what was the dominant culture and what he thought was home to create a new home. So I'd like to hold up 2 examples of how the dominant culture at the time of the Maccabees was different from Jewish culture as it was evolving then. Just 2 examples. The first is about the human-divine encounter. Hellenism sought to prove God's existence through logic, through rational argument, through the intellect, where Judaism, then and now, seeks not to prove God's existence, but rather to feel God's nearness, to receive God's blessing. Hellenism promoted that to embrace the divine was to contemplate the divine. It was a bit of a detached exercise, right? To think about rather than to meet. Judaism promotes that to embrace the divine is to draw near to the divine, even to the point of struggling with the divine, even to challenge God. If you think of last week's Torah portion and Jacob's wrestling match with the divine, and Elie Wiesel famously teaches that a Jew can be angry with God, a Jew can shout and rail against God, but a Jew cannot be detached from God. A second example of how our ancestors were countercultural when Hellenism was the dominant culture of the day. Hellenism talks about independence, that human perfection is acquired when you are no longer dependent on anyone. There is the self-made man, the self-sufficient person. That is the ideal. Judaism teaches the opposite. Early in our Torah, it is written, it is not good for a person to be alone. Rabbinic Judaism asserts that human beings are incomplete by themselves, and the ideal is always to be in relationship, to acknowledge weaknesses, to understand our dependence on others. This is the way of the Jew. And to make these human connections sacred. Think of what the vow says under the chuppah. We say to our beloved, Harei at mikudeshet li, or Harei ata mikudash li. You are sanctified to me. You are holy for me. The Greek philosophers fell in love with thoughts, with rational ideas that were pure and clear, and the intellect was considered to be the highest form of love. Judaism, by contrast, says that the interpersonal love is messy, makes us vulnerable, but it is a permanent and positive feature of the human condition. So it is not independence that we seek, but rather interdependence. To be wholly human is to give up the quest for self-sufficiency and instead to love, to attach, to assist others when they struggle, to give of ourselves. This is the truest form of humanity. Hanukkah is the story of Jews living under Greek rule and reaffirming that their Jewish way of walking through the world is our way still. Hanukkah is the triumph of the Jewish spirit to embrace our own way of seeing the world and seeing our place in it. Greeks had wealth and science, art, literature, and philosophy, and we certainly were drawn to those then and are drawn to those now. We have been influenced and shaped by these gifts from Greek culture, but the Hanukkah story is the story of never letting go of our own way of being. Yes, take the best of the dominant culture and creatively add it to our own culture. But in the end, Hellenism did not offer enough faith and not enough heart. The Talmudic sages teach that God wants the heart. That was the rabbi's way of saying the intellect and the aesthetic ways of Hellenism are not enough for us. So how do we reaffirm our own commitments to our countercultural ways today? That's the question that I encourage you to ask one another this Hanukkah. How do we take the best of the gifts, not only of the Greeks, of science, philosophy, art, and so on, but also the great gifts of the dominant culture in which we live? And how do we then attach them to Judaism's ways of faith and ethics and human encounter. I would suggest that one example of a good way that we do that is Shabbat. The beauty of this day is the music, absolutely. And the music is beautiful because it draws us closer to one another and uplifts our prayers Godward. It isn't the music alone that has value. It is the weaving together of the music, the prayer, the togetherness, the attachment. A Shabbat melody is perfect and pure even when we don't hit the notes. A Shabbat melody is perfect and pure because it is sung together and in the hopes of reaching the divine. Shabbat Shalom.